Good afternoon, everybody. So I get you after the session after lunch, right? So we're going to have a great time. And you know that saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? I wish that were true of Hershey calories. The calories you consume in Hershey stay in Hershey. Unfortunately, they do not. But anyway, it was a great lunch. So anyway, I'm Dr. Laura Moran. I work at the Patton Harrisburg office. I'm the statewide lead for our state systemic improvement plan. So hopefully you're all in the right place. This session is about graduation. We're going to focusing in on what we can do to support our students, particularly with disabilities, and what Pennsylvania has done in their journey to help. So that's where we're going to get started today. I have three objectives for us today. The first one I want to talk to you about is, so what is this state systemic improvement plan? You know, in education, we love acronyms. So here's another one, SSIP. So I'm going to talk to you about what that is and how we're implementing this across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The second thing I want to talk to you about is an early warning system. How are we collecting data in a really friendly, user-friendly, I should say, way, and an effective way? So second thing is early warning system. The third thing I want to talk to you all about is where can you access these resources? So we have a lot of publications we're going to go through, things you can find on our website, but then also what are some of the national resources that you can access? So that's going to be our third objective. And then we'll have some time at the end of the day too to take some questions that you may have. So that's going to be our day for this afternoon. So let's start up with a warm-up. Let's do this. What year was it? All right, see if you know. All right, so here's our first one, the Jetsons. Does anybody know when the Jetsons came out? Just 93. Take it. 93, okay. Anybody else?
87.
87, okay. 60s. 1962. Think about that. The Jetsons came out in 1962, 60 some years ago, right? All right, I'm going to give you another photo. Fisher-Price phone. Rotary, you may still have one. Your kids may still play with it, or your grandchildren, depending upon how old you are, though you all are way too young for grandchildren. What year did the Fisher-Price phone come out? 60s. 1961.
Oh, wow.
So think about that. 1961 was the Fisher-Price rotary phone toy. A year later comes out the Jetsons. I want us to think about that because sometimes we're so focused on what we've always done, what's right in front of us, but we need to think about the future. And when we're working with students with disabilities, when we're working with our students who don't have disabilities, who are graduation, what's going to be the post-secondary outcome for them? We can't continue to do the same things we've always been doing because it's a whole different world. So look what happened with the Jetsons that we saw when? Not even the 1900s. We're back in the 2020s, right? COVID, FaceTime, telehealth, online classes, Zoom, right? And then we've got Rosie. We've got vacuum cleaners that can clean themselves. We've got AI. So that's where we are in 2023. But these concepts all came about over 60 years ago. So I want us to think about what we're doing or what we're trying to do. Some things are evidence-based practices. They've got 30 plus years of research, and we need to continue doing some of those things because we know it works. At the same time, we've got to think, wow, we may need to change the schedule, heaven forbid, but there are things that we need to do to make sure that our students are successful. So our state systemic improvement plan is to increase graduation rates and decrease dropout rates for students with disabilities. That's the focus. Now, it's not to say we don't care about everybody graduating, right? We do. But you know what? What works for students with disabilities is probably going to benefit, not probably, it will benefit all of your students. So that's what we're focusing in on here is we're looking at this specific subgroup of students or this population, but it's going to make a difference for all of your students when you think about that population. So what is it? So it's a framework. It's a framework to say, you know what, here are some of the best practices, and we want to build capacity. And we want to really serve all of our students, but particularly our more marginalized students. our students with disabilities, our students who may be English learners, our students who may be socioeconomically disadvantaged. So we're looking at how we can create this framework to support all of our students. And we want to build capacity. So patent consultants are helping to do this, but at the same time, that support goes away. How then can schools sustain this work? So that's what we're all about, looking at that. So about 2014, patent consultants met with the National Dropout Prevention Center and said, okay, we want to increase graduation rates and decrease dropout rates for students with disabilities. Where do we even start? What do we even do? And so they said there are 5 phases of implementation that you really need to think about. And so this is what you all can do when you're thinking about where do you even get started if you're looking at increasing graduation. The first thing is in phase 1 is to create a team. And in our case, we looked at a statewide level team and then a local leadership team. And I'm going to talk to you about who should be on that team and what that team does and how they function. It sounds so simple and easy. Create a team. Let me tell you, that's some of our hardest things is creating the team, getting the team to meet regularly, and then what do they do when they meet. So, but that is number 1. You've got to get people on board to champion this work. The second thing we need to do is look at the data to make sure we're looking at the appropriate supports and who we're supporting and why. So that's using an early warning system. So we need our team first, and then that team is going to use and analyze data. And we're going to be very specific in what data we're using and why. So I'm going to tell you about why are we using an early warning system. The next thing we want to do is take a look at what are the appropriate interventions. Once we see who is off track, how do we intervene appropriately? I think of Dr. Kathleen Lane. She does a lot of work around positive behavior interventions and supports. And she says, if you screen, you must intervene, right? We can collect all of this data, but if we don't do anything with it, it's all for naught. So we want to intervene appropriately. So we take a look at what's the data showing us, and then how do we intervene appropriately. Then we need an action plan. All right, who's going to do what? When? Where? How? Do we have the appropriate resources? Do we have the professional development that our teachers need to be successful? Do we have the capacity as far as even the facilities or the bandwidth, right? If you're in a rural community, sometimes that can be an issue. So looking at, do we have the action plan to make sure we have the people doing the right things that we need, as well as do we have the resources to make that happen? Then phase 5 is to say, is this working or not? We need to evaluate and monitor progress. And if it's not working, why is that the case? If it is working, what can we do to continue to enhance that? So those are the 5 phases of implementation. So then we took a look at, okay, what supports do we need to put in place? So we created a theory of action. Again, our vision, our mission is to increase graduation rates and decrease dropout rates for students with disabilities. So how are we going to do that? So we created and looked at 7 coherent improvement strategies. So all of you have a handout there that's a booklet, and that has the 7 coherent improvement strategies, and it's a 1-pager. So the first coherent improvement strategies is, number 1 is an early warning system. So all of our sites that are involved in doing this, the first thing that they needed to do was incorporate an early warning system. After that, they could select coherent improvement strategies based upon the needs of the student. So what's our data telling us that we need help with? So the second area was multi-tiered systems of supports in academics. How are students doing, particularly in the areas of English language arts and math? But also if they're failing other subject areas, what's happening and why that may be the case. We also have multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. That could include school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, but it may be looking at some more strategic interventions. One of the interventions I'm going to talk to you more about, or what many of our sites selected, was Check and Connect, a Tier 3 mentoring program that really looks at making a connection with students. Number 4 is attendance and alternative programming. How many of you have issues around attendance, right? that has been a big issue, particularly as we've come back and re-engaged students after COVID. How do we re-engage students into the process? So we need to look at, why am I logging on if I'm in a cyber program? Why am I coming to school? Why am I coming to school on time? What am I doing to make sure that I feel like I belong here? So that's one of the things we're looking at around attendance. The other thing is alternative programming. You know what, the 7:30 to 2:30 schedule doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So we may need to change the schedule. We may need to offer maybe a course online, right? We may need to offer after school or summer school. So we're looking at what are some alternatives. Credit recovery if we're really behind in credits. So that's number 4. Number 5 is taking a look at culturally responsive practices. Do our students ever see themselves reflected in the curriculum and content? What are some of the ways in which students, again, feel like they belong or they want to come to school, or they feel like they just feel like a part of it, like their culture is represented, or they feel as if they can make a difference coming to school? 6 is family engagement. And sometimes we see family engagement wanes as students get older, right? And there's lots of different reasons for that. But how can we engage families in this process? It's not necessarily just a traditional parent-teacher conference. But what are some other ways we can engage families to make sure that they feel part of this process and their students can be successful? Then number 7 is secondary transition. Looking at what are the students' goals, particularly after they graduate from school. Whether that's post-secondary outcomes and looking at a career or a job, or is it going to college? So looking at what are some of those plans we can make. So our schools don't do all 7 of these, right? They start with an early warning system, and then based upon that analysis, they then select 1 or 2 areas to focus in on, and then over time, they either get better with that one or add additional strategies. I'm also going to show you how we've embedded number 5, culturally responsive practices, and number 6. So we don't see them as additional things to do. So as I mentioned, you have this booklet that's a 1-pager, and I'll show you at the end where you can access all these publications. You can either download them or you can order them for free on our patent website. So there you'll see the 7 coherent improvement strategies as the 1-pagers. So let me tell you where this journey began. So back in 2015, we started with 12 high schools. We call them learning sites across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have 3 patent offices, 1 in the east, 1 in the central region, and 1 in the western region. And patent consultants supported these schools across the Commonwealth. They were urban schools, rural schools, suburban schools. We had 1 cyber charter school within this sample. We also then partnered with HUNE, which is in Philadelphia. It's a community parent resource center, and they do a lot around family engagement. Many of their students are English learners. Luz Hernandez is here, who's the director, so if you have more questions about that. But they offer a lot of support and guidance on how to help parents and families, but also students, particularly, let's think about this, Philadelphia, right? Where they may not get some of that interpersonal or personalized supports that they need. HUNE offers a lot of that. They also offer Check and Connect and mentoring. So there's a lot of things they offer for families and for students there. So we've partnered with them. So I want to get you a little bit excited, right, about data. You're thinking, okay, all right, I'll try this. So we had these 12 high schools. We worked with them for 6 years, and I want to show you some of the results. So we had some longitudinal data where we followed a group of students for a period of time. So our first group of students, they started in they started in September of 2015. But we started collecting data, and we looked at attendance, behavior, and course performance data is what we're looking at. In January of 2016, 66% of the students were on track. In 4.5 years, 99% were on track, right? 4.5 years, all right? Then we followed another group, a group 2, and with the group 2 students, we can see there that they started in October 2016. By August 2020, again, 4 years of implementation, 69% were on track, And then 95% were on track 4 years later. Group 3, we had starting October 2017, and then in August of 2020, so you can see there, in just a few years, 67% were on track, and then 82% were on track. So we're seeing a couple things happening here. One is, the longer the students were in school, we saw more progress. But also, our schools got more proficient at implementing the strategies and resources over time. So it benefited two things. The students were benefiting, but also the systems were in place to help students. So as those students coming in by the third group, we had things in place, or we had personnel trained, or we had resources available. So as time went on, students benefited, but also the system was beneficial. The other way we want to look at it is how many students had multiple risk factors, because we know it's a domino effect. If I'm not in school, if I'm absent, you know what? That's going to affect my grades. I'm probably going to be falling behind. I may not be catching up on coursework. And then I don't want people to know that I'm failing, and so then that impacts my behavior, right? So we had some students who, they were off track in more than one area. So again, let's go back to that first group of students. When we looked at this in January of 2016, 65% had more than one area where they were off track. They had multiple risk factors. 4.5 years later, only 2% had multiple risk factors. So did we make a difference? You bet we did. We saw an increase, a decrease of students with multiple risk factors. We then took a look at group 2. Same thing, 44% had multiple risk factors. But then just 4 years of implementation, it went down to 4%. So we're still making that positive impact with our group 2. Let's go to group 3. They had 39% had multiple risk factors. After just 3 years of implementation, it went down to 12%. So we're seeing, again, an increase of student achievement and then a decrease in students who may be off track or having multiple risk factors. So you're thinking, okay, well, what did y'all do, right? Because this is very exciting. We're seeing this progress. Our students are making gains. So what are we doing, and what did we learn by doing this? So I want to share with you 4 areas of things that we've learned. Things around teaming, data collection, looking at those implementation strategies of the coherent improvement strategies, and then also I'm going to tell you a little about that action plan. So let's take a look at some of the things we learned. So core teams. How many of you have a core team of people now who meet, whether it's around PBIS or maybe it's around academics or multi-tiered systems of support? How many of you have a core team already in place? Okay, a few of you do. It's hard at the high school level, right? It's a little bit easier at the elementary level because you have grade level teaming. Sometimes they have common planning time. At the high school level, now we're getting into departments, right? You have the math department, the science department, the English department, the athletic department. So when do we have time to meet? So one of the things we suggest is keep the team small. Let's start with a small core group of people who then can share that information with other departments. But you need the right people at the table. It's not always about the number. It could be about the people who have the roles and responsibilities. So the first person that you really need is your administrator, right? You need an administrator. And that could be the assistant principal, could be the principal, either one. The second person you really need is a special education director. So that person you want to make sure, again, is there because we want that cohesion between special education and general education. We need general education and special education teachers, right? Even if you just have one of each. We also need a data coordinator. I was thinking about this not too long ago, and many, I'll just say moons ago when I started teaching, someone told me you need to know the principal really well, but also the people you really need to know is the custodian and the secretary, right? Because they really run things. Now I say you need to know the custodian, the secretary, and your data or IT person. Because they're going to be integral in making sure that we have the data that we need. So we have the personnel, And then if you want to, you can invite a school counselor, a school psychologist, a social worker, but they may not be coming to every single meeting. We typically meet on a monthly basis, but we're looking at data on a quarterly basis. So maybe at that quarterly meeting is when we want to bring in the truancy officer if we're taking a look at attendance, or maybe we want to bring in that social worker, or we want to bring in that school counselor if we're talking maybe about scheduling. But that core team that meets on a monthly basis really can comprise of the administrators, your general and special education teachers, and at least having your data coordinator. You can also want to think about, this is the core team meeting once a month, but they will need to meet with other people beyond that one monthly meeting. So they can meet with the students themselves who are off track, with families who are off track. So we need to make sure that we had that. Now, I talked to you about data collection. We were looking at early warning systems that each of the schools were utilizing. But we were collecting that data as a project to see what was happening. And at one point, we had all of our sites giving us the information on Excel documents. So we had 36 Excel documents that we were looking at one time, every single quarter, and it just was way too much. So we said we need to have the schools import the information into an online system. So we now have an online system where we can access that data, and it doesn't matter what early warning system they're using, we have a platform to do that. I mentioned your schools need a data coordinator. Well, not all of our data coordinators are good about analyzing the data. And let me give you an example. So it may be where a student is a senior and they don't have a grade for math. And there's like, why don't they have a grade for math? Well, maybe they only need 3 credits for math. So by their senior year, they don't need another math course, so they're not taking math. But the data coordinator may not know that, right? Versus someone who, maybe it's your special ed director, your principal, or somebody else knows how to analyze that data. So we suggested that in addition to your data coordinator, if they're not as fluent with some of the regulations around how data is calculated, if they're just truly pulling the data, that's great because we need that. But you may need someone who's a data analysis. And that could be a teacher, that could be a principal, that could be a counselor, a school psychologist, someone who's helping us to analyze that data. So we found that to be a key piece in having on the team. We also needed a standardized protocol. So no matter who was coming in and out, because we had a lot of attrition, people leaving, people retiring, shortages, whatever the case may be, we needed a protocol so no matter who's coming in and out, that team could really support each other and they had that agenda in place each time. So I mentioned those 7 coherent improvement strategies that we had. We also took a look at how effective are they and how long does it take for this to really happen. Well, the National Institute for Research network called NERN says it takes 3 to 5 years to implement anything really well. Whew, 3 to 5 years. And I'm going to use an F word, but not the one you think. Fidelity, right? To even get to fidelity, it can take 3 to 5 years and sometimes longer. But we have seniors sitting in front of us. They don't have 3 to 5 years, right? They're seniors. What are they going to do? So when we're looking at goals and what we want our students to be able to do, you need to look at this 2 ways. What are some short-term goals we need to put in place, and what are some long-term goals? Our short-term goals may be things like credit recovery or changing the schedule or looking at some alternative courses that seniors can take, setting up an internship. Because what can we do to make sure they're going to be successful to graduate? They have a year, maybe less, to do that. Versus what are we doing starting with our students who come in 9th grade so that we don't get to this place by the time they're seniors. We have 3 to 4 years of implementation by the time if they're freshmen to their senior year. So we really had to look at it 2 ways. What are some short-term goals we need to put in place, but then what are some long-term goals? Our site selected Check and Connect as one of the most frequent coherent improvement strategies. And that fell under typically multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. So Check and Connect, again, it's a mentoring program. It's one of the few that has the evidence-based research behind it, and it comes from the University of Minnesota. So I'm going to talk to you a bit more about that when we go through some of the strategies. Is anybody implementing Check and Connect? Okay, we do have one person doing that. Okay, so I'll talk to you a bit more about that because we have found that to be a very viable option in helping our students, particularly those who may be off track. So remember that action plan I was talking about? You've got to evaluate who's doing what, when, where, and how. And I showed you the 7 coherent improvement strategies. Well, none of our sites selected family engagement to work on. And that's probably no surprise, right? I'm looking at the data. If I have an attendance problem, I need to get to attendance. I have a behavioral issue or grades are low or we're failing. We've got to address multi-tiered systems of supports. So I can see why schools were selecting that other than family engagement. So what we decided was within our action plan, we created this column here that says family engagement for evidence-based practices. So no matter what we're doing, how are you engaging families in that process? How are they getting access to grades? How are you interfacing with families? Are you only calling them when there's a problem? Do you ever call them when there's something good happening? Do you ever send a postcard home? Like, what is it that we're doing, whether we're doing PBIS, whether we're doing Check and Connect, whether we're doing something around credit recovery or attendance, how are we engaging families? So we created that column. So I encourage all of you, go back and look at your action plans. Maybe you're on school improvement. Maybe you have an action plan in place. How are we including families in this process? The other thing that none of our sites selected were the culturally responsive practices. So, and we really didn't get to that in our first 6 years working with them. So we said, we're working with now a new set of high schools. We said, we need to really make sure we're addressing equity. So with the action plan now that our sites are using, in addition to family engagement, we also have a column that says equity considerations. What does that mean? What are we looking at? Maybe it's disaggregating our data. What are we finding? Are African American male students being suspended more than their white peers? And then if so, why may that be the case? Are we seeing more office referrals by boys versus girls? Like, what is it that we're seeing in their data? So sometimes it's just even disaggregating our data to see what's really working or not. We also said something we needed to do was align it with our school improvement plan. So many of our sites are either in comprehensive school improvement or their subgroup of students with disabilities aren't graduating at the same rate as general education students. And so we've been working, and Karen Deary is a big part of that, in saying, look, what are your goals in your school improvement plan? Why are we recreating the wheel? Whatever your goals and resources that you're using for that, that's what should be in this plan here. So we're not duplicating efforts, we're aligning efforts. So we've really made an impact here to say, whatever you're working on here, we want to make sure that we're embedding with this. Because guess what? A lot of school improvement plans, what they need help with? Graduation. That's what we're hearing, and that's what we're doing. So we're aligning those action plans together to make sure that they fit. So that was iteration 1. We are now in what's called iteration 2, where we're working with 15 high schools across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Again, they're represented in the central, the eastern, and the western part of the state. And patent consultants are working with them. We're also partnering with some of our IU consultants. We're also partnering again with HUNE to make sure that we're really looking at what are some supports for our English learners and particularly for our families as well. Of these 15 sites, they are some of the lowest performing sites in Pennsylvania. Now, our first iteration, we had a little bit of a mix. They weren't necessarily the lowest. We had some who were a little bit better than others. But this time we said, you know what, we really need to help our low performing high schools. So that's who we're working with. And it's been quite a journey, and also we're now in the post-COVID, or kind of maybe still trying to work through COVID and some of those things. So we're looking really to see how can we really help these sites to make sure they're successful. The other thing that's interesting about these 15 schools is 4 of them are cyber charter schools. So they include, we have high schools that are public schools, some are your traditional brick and mortar, some are charter schools, and then some are 4 of the 15 are cyber charter schools. So it's a little bit different mix than our first cohort that we had. So that takes a look at our state systemic improvement plan, where we are. So we are now in the midst of year 3 with our 15 learning sites. So I want to go to talk to you about early warning systems. So early warning systems is a way for us how we can gather data, again, quickly, efficiently, and be really productive during our meetings. And we want to make sure, again, we're providing the appropriate interventions for our students. So this comes from Build a Grad Nation, and one of the things it takes a look at, so why do we need an early warning system? It's a way in which we can collaborate and as a team to make sure that administrators, educators, family members, that they're all on track, to make sure that they're getting the supports that they need, particularly towards the pathway to graduation. So that's why we want to take a look at an early warning system. So this information came from Johns Hopkins University with Robert Belfonts. And Robert Belfonts took a look at multiple indicators to say, what are some indicators to show a student may be at risk of dropping out of school? And here's what he found. It's called the ABCs: attendance, behavior, and course performance. All right, so I want to do a little bit of formative assessment here. So I want you to think about attendance. So I want you to show me with your fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I'll give you a hint. It could be 1 through 5. How many days a month can a student miss where it starts to impact their success? Okay, how many days a month? So raise your hand, either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. What do you think? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, correct answer is 2. Think about that. 2 days a month. That's not a lot. It doesn't even have to be back to back. So if a student is missing 2 or more days a month, that's at risk for them when it comes to attendance. We're also going to take a look at behavior, and behavior is characterized in 2 different ways, looking at school code of conduct and state reportable offenses. So school code of conduct are those office discipline referrals, and state reportable offenses are looking at those major offenses, such as weapons or drugs or things like that. So those are the 2 categories. Then course performance, we look at English language arts and mathematics. Now that's not to say if I have a student who's failing biology or history or even physical education, they're going to be at risk of not graduating. But at the same time, if they're having trouble in English language arts and math, more than likely they're going to have trouble in other subject areas. So those are the 2 subject areas that we're taking a look at. So again, going back to Johns Hopkins University, we took a look at what are the metrics to show if a student is off track. What does being green on track mean? Yellow's a warning, red means I'm off track. So these are national statistics that we use from Johns Hopkins. So attendance, I'm here more than 90% of the time. Yellow is I'm here 80 to 90%, and if I'm here less than 80%, I'm red, I'm off track. For state reportable offenses, it's either a 0 or a 1, right? You either have that or you don't. So it's just red or green. For school code of conduct, those office discipline referrals, green is 0 to 3, yellow is 4 to 5, and then red is more than 5. And I'm going to show you where you can access this early warning system metrics on our website, and also this PowerPoint has been uploaded on the app for you, so you can have access to that. Course grades can vary from school to school. I work in one school district where if you have less than a 70, if you have 69 or lower, that's failing. I was like, holy moly, 69 is failing, right? But that's the school district policy. So what we had to make sure is we have these 15 learning sites that we're working with. We had 12 learning sites we were working with before. We had to make sure we were measuring them with all the same benchmarks, or all the same metrics. So again, this is based on national data. So if you have a 71 or higher, you're green. 61 to 70, you're yellow. Anything less than that, 60 or lower, is considered red. Another way to take a look at this is you have red and yellow where you're off track or sliding, and then you have on track but even college ready. So if I'm looking at those post-secondary goals, even if I'm looking at career, I need to have probably a B or better. It's not just enough to be passing. I've got to have really good grades. I've also got to have great behavior. I haven't been suspended. I'm not getting sent to the office. And also I'm in school. So about 90% or greater is on track, but if you really are looking at college ready, or again, you're looking at a career to be really successful or post-secondary training, you need to be here probably more than 95% of the time. So it's kind of a great way to kind of differentiate that. Sometimes we get so focused on students who are off track, we forget about the on track. Where do you want to go from here? So really challenging our students and having those high expectations. So I'm going to talk to you about early warning systems. So how many of you have or are using an early warning system? Is anybody using one? Okay, what database are you using? Is it, or is it your school has your own, or do you know?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm just
yeah.
a special education teacher.
That's,
but so I don't know those names.
Yeah.
I mean, what you had in your last slide, that's what we use.
Okay.
Like those systems.
Awesome. Do you know what?
Power
Power School.
School.
Okay, Power School. Okay. So some of our learning sites use Power School. Some use Sapphire. Some use Ed Insight, On Hands. Some created their own. The reason why I want to say this is probably if you go back to your district and you are using one of these database systems, find out, because you can get early warning systems report. You may not even realize you can do that. It's just talking to your company to say, look, here are the metrics we want to do, and here's the report that we want to get. And your district may already be paying for that, or it's an additional charge for them to be able to create that report. And then once it's created, you have it. The reason why I say that, when we've worked in schools, what we see is, I'll say to them, are you collecting attendance data? And they said, well, of course we are. The school secretary collects that, enters it into a database. I said, well, what about behavior? And they said, well, yeah, maybe they're using Swiss, maybe their dean of students or their assistant principals collecting office discipline referrals. Then I said, well, what about course grades? And they say, well, yeah, our teachers input grades into this system. So the question isn't, are you collecting attendance, behavior, and course performance data? Because it's check, 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 yep. We're not collecting it all in one place. Who has the password? Who has access to it? This is a way we can get all of this quickly and easily, and the right people can get access to it, right? Because we still want to maintain that confidentiality. Not everybody should have access, but I certainly should have access to the students that I serve. And I need to see how are they doing in attendance, behavior, and course performance. Because as Dr. Belfon's found out, if you are off track in one of those areas, you have a 75% chance of dropping out. So we can be inundated with data, but we don't need to be. We can have those as really key points to see what we need. So find out what your district is using. Look at the metrics, see if you can create a report so then you can easily pull up that attendance, behavior, and course performance. Now remember I mentioned that our teams met on a monthly basis. What I really think is important is that you need to have that team meet on a regular basis, finding that time. But here's the key thing that we want to think about. We're looking to see, yep, who's on track, who's off track, who may be at risk, how can we support these students with the needs that they have. But here's the key I want you all to think about. Organizing the adults. Who's going to support the students for intervention? Or are they having trouble in algebra? Or is the student having a need that their case manager needs to be aware of? I love that we have a special education teacher here, because I need to know maybe what are they needing help with. In addition to then what are their IEP goals? So then you're looking at some of those things. So it's a way in which we can organize the adults. This morning I went to Dr. Batch's session, and one of the sessions he had on teaming and collaboration, he said research has just come out that problem solving for students was more effective when you did problem solving as a team versus problem solving on an individual basis. So I thought that goes right back to here, right? We have this core team looking at Here are the needs that we're seeing, and maybe we can look at some problem solving or how we need to distribute this information to the special education department, to the math department, to the English department, so that we're making sure that we're doing that. So what we utilized was a data team meeting protocol. And again, I'll show you where you can access this data team meeting protocol. If you have your data ahead of time, you can pull that report so you can quickly see who's red, yellow, or green. You can do this in 45 minutes to an hour. Most of our sites use an hour, but you can really do this in 45 minutes. And what it is that you have your date, your data collection, who's going to collect that data and share it with the team. You have a facilitator, a timekeeper, and a recorder, and those roles should change. The facilitator, timekeeper, and recorder should change every time, so you're not having the same person do it. You take attendance, who's there, you spend the first 5 minutes, let's just look at the data. What are we seeing? What are the trends? What are the areas or issues that we're having? Then we're going to spend 30 minutes and say, oh, look at this. Our ninth graders aren't doing as well as our seniors. Or we're saying, look at all the attendance, and boy, does that impact their grades. Or we're seeing what happened second quarter because the behavior just plummeted, right? So you're looking for trends to see what are the areas that we may need to work on in those key areas. Then you have about 5-10 minutes for announcements and next steps. What do we need to do next? Who do we need to meet with? Is there training we need? Are we thinking this intervention is going to help support versus another? And then you always leave with a success. You spend the last 5 minutes sharing what's been successful since our last meeting. What do you want to share? So you always leave on a high note. And then you end with our next meeting and date and time. So our sites do receive some funding for participating in this, and we have found that after school and the teachers do get paid has been very beneficial. So I know that may or may not be an opportunity for all of you depending upon funding, but we didn't have to worry about subs. But that was one way that we looked at it. Another school, what they've done is during release time, they may not have a certain duty, and so they've met during another time, and so they're all meeting at a particular time. So instead of having to do that duty, they meet during that time. But I highly recommend, can we find 45 minutes or an hour to meet at least once a month with the team, and then those folks can share out that information with other team members as needed. How we want to share that out, you can also look at individual students. So you may want to make a list, well, who's off track? So you can list who the students are, what's their area of concern, taking a look at their IEPs, what's the intervention we want to try and put into place, who's going to be responsible for that, who's going to follow up with the student. Let's bring the student in, right? Let's talk to the student, find out what's going on. Let's also interface with the families, whether that's maybe through a phone call or Zoom meeting. So those may be 10 minutes long. They may be, the case manager may be meeting with them. It may not be a whole team looking at it, but that's a way you can look at individualized supports for students who may be off track. So here again is our process. One is get that early warning system in place. Let's look at the appropriate interventions to support our students who may be off track, and then let's develop a plan. And we're looking at that action plan and looking at that protocol that we're using. Okay, part 3 is I want to share with you where can you find these resources. I've shared a lot with you, so I want to share on our patent website and nationally. So all of you should have the ABC for Equity publication. If you just want to pull that out. This is actually our 3rd publication around what we call the ABC series. Again, ABC standing for Attendance, Behavior, and Course Performance. So when we're looking at attendance, what we're looking at, and this publication is in English and in Spanish, and again, you can order these at no cost for mailing from our patent publications. And the question is, do your students feel welcome? They feel like they belong there? What's it like walking into your building? We do a lot, and I say we, patent consultants, we do a lot of going into schools and seeing what's happening and what's going on. And sometimes I look like, where do I find a place to park? How do your students feel when they walk into the door? How does the secretary greet you, right? All that makes a big difference. A few years ago, I walked into an elementary school and there were flags that were represented from every country of the families who attended that school, whose students attended that school. And it was wonderful. It was like a little United Nations. But I thought, how exciting would it be to walk into a building and you see the country where maybe you were from or you just came from, and wouldn't that be so welcoming? I shared this story before. I do some work with an organization called High Hopes for Haiti. And a few years ago, I was in Haiti at Port-au-Prince. The school's a little bit, it's in St. Mark. But anyway, we were at the airport, and I was in this little cafe. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so I don't know if any of you are from the Philadelphia. I think Pittsburgh, folks? Okay, good. All right. So anyway, I'm sitting there at this cafe. We're getting ready for our flight. And there's a big Steeler banner. Like, yeah, there's Steeler fans in Haiti. Like, how exciting was this? I was able to make a connection. I felt like, oh, I belong, right? There's some connection. Your students are longing for that connection. And it can be physically. Like, where physically can I go? Are my classrooms welcoming? What's the building look like? But then also, do I feel welcome, like, you know my name? You smile at the door when I enter. I can't tell you how excited. I know teenagers may not care, but guess what? When you know who they are, you say their name, you acknowledge them. Just one caring adult can make a difference whether a student stays in school. One caring adult. That could be the custodian. That could be the secretary. That could be a teacher. It could be a paraprofessional. It could be the principal, right? It could be anybody. But so do they feel welcome? Are you happy to see them? Are you making it a conducive place? What does the physicality of the building look like? Is it inspirational that you want to be there? So that's one of the key things. Do your students feel welcome? How many of you are familiar with attendanceworks.org? Is anybody familiar with that website? Okay. You all have to go on that website. Now, I'm going to share it with you here. You see it here. They talk a little bit about attendance. But I want to talk to you a little bit about just chronic absenteeism. A lot of times we think about chronic absenteeism just being unexcused absences or students who may be suspended or expulsion. Whether though I'm excused or unexcused, I'm still absent. Now, how I address that issue is going to be different because an excused absence isn't the same thing as dealing with an unexcused absence. However, if maybe I'm receiving occupational therapy every third or fourth period on Wednesdays, that's legitimate, it's excused, but I'm still missing third and fourth period every Wednesday. So whether I'm excused or not, what is it I'm going to do or have a plan in place to make sure I'm able to catch up with that work, whether I'm excused or not? So chronic absenteeism, again, is students who are missing more than 10% of the time. Again, that just is 2 days a month. And whether that's excused or unexcused. So what attendanceworks.org is suggesting is, are we looking at this from a multi-tiered system of support? So looking at tier 1, what are we doing to acknowledge the students who do come to school? Do we do anything? Do we acknowledge that? And we're not necessarily looking at perfect attendance, because a lot of times we think, oh, well, if you're here for the whole month of November, then you'll get a party at the end. Well, it's November 2nd, I'm absent, I'm out. So perfect attendance isn't always necessarily the name of the game when it comes to attendance. Also, let's do short-term goals. If you have someone who's been out for a few weeks or they're out every few days, let's start with 1 week. Can you be here at least maybe 3 or 4 days of that week and then honor that at the end of the week? So start with smaller goals. Look at not perfection, but regularity that they're coming. Tier 2 is looking at, can we personalize this maybe for some students who are on the edge there. They're not truant yet, but we can see, boy, that's going to happen here sooner rather than later. So putting in some of those supports. So tier 1 is about acknowledging students who are there, celebrating that. Tier 2 is looking at, okay, we're starting to see a slide here. So what are some things we may need to do? Maybe it's looking at our check-in and check-out. That's checking in. Are they here? Someone cares about them. Tier 3 then is looking at more intensive cases, and that's more where you have your truancy issues. Maybe there's some very severe trauma going on or something else that they need. And this is where we look at it may be a home visit. It could be a lot of different things that you're doing, but that's looking at more intensive supports. But if we look at it from that lens, it looks at what our interventions may be around attendance. And this can tie in really well to your positive behavior interventions and supports along with that. A great idea from Attendance Works, this is from Grand Rapids, Michigan. They did this campaign in their community called Strive for Less Than 5. Strive for being in school or missing school for less than 5 days of the year. So they had banners and campaigns and billboards. It was on the playground. It was in the community. It was at local businesses. They made magnets. They made buttons and pins. I don't know if they did T-shirts or not, but their whole campaign was Strive for Less Than 5. Think how simple that is, right? So everybody can think, strive for less than 5. You don't want to miss more than 5 days of school for the year. If we can strive for that, then we're in a good place. So that's just one of the ideas from attendanceworks.org that you can think about. So definitely check that out if you're looking at how we can get our community more involved with that. Let's look at behavior, because that's where we want to take a look at what are some of our policies and procedures. Are our policies pushing our students out of school, or are they helping to keep our students there? Are we looking at restorative practices versus always going to suspension and expulsion? What are we doing to help our students feel, again, that they belong, that they feel welcome, that they don't have some of those negative stereotypes? So that's the things we want to look at around behavior. And again, you can do that through your positive behavior interventions and supports. And that may be, again, school-wide supporting positive behavior, acknowledging that behavior. But then it also could be a tier 2. Again, I mentioned check in and check out, or tier 3, taking a look at check and connect. So let me talk to you about check and connect. So again, it's from the University of Minnesota. It is a mentoring program, and it has 4 components to it. So you have a mentor, and this mentor really is to develop a long-term relationship and working with a student. They like for mentors to work for students for 2 years if possible. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. You also want mentors who really want to do this work. You don't want someone who's voluntold to be a mentor. You want someone who really is passionate about this, who can do this work, and what we call persistence plus. Because guess what? A lot of students who aren't doing very well, they're not coming to school, they're not, maybe their behavior's off or they're failing. Probably the last person they want to see or talk to is a caring adult, which maybe sounds odd to us, but I have a friend who worked with a student, and he couldn't understand why this stranger cared so much about him. He couldn't get it, and he kind of pushed back a lot, right? He was like, I don't care, I don't know, but it took a while to get him to open up, and they created this really great bond and relationship, and the student did graduate. But it took a lot for that mentor not to be offended, to keep trying. I want to listen. You don't have all the answers, right? Not judging the student for what maybe he or she did. So that's what we talk about the persistence plus. Checking is checking on that ABC data, attendance, behavior, course performance data. Maybe checking to see if a student is tardy. Checking to see if they gotten detention, or maybe checking to see if they need anything. Whether it's the reason I'm tardy is I'm working really late at night. So I have this nighttime job. That's why it's hard for me to get here early in the morning. So you're connecting them by doing some problem solving. So what are some supports you may need? Maybe it is changing our schedule. Or maybe it is getting you an alarm clock. Or maybe it's looking at the transportation that you have or don't have access to. And then how are you engaging with families? This is a great piece of check and connect. Again, so often when we engage with families, it's for negative things. This is a positive thing, right? We're getting everybody excited. We're here to help and support and engage and partner with you to make sure that this student is successful and graduates. So that's a little about check and connect. The other thing you can think about is this is from PBIS incentives and bringing in student voice. So sometimes we think incentives have to be something tangible. Not necessarily. It can be having a volleyball game after school, or or during, we're going to extend the lunch period, and we're going to have volleyball nets. It's a beautiful spring day. So because you were here this amount of time or your behavior was doing really well, we're going to have a volleyball party. It's also taking a look at maybe you're giving students 10 minutes to be on their phone. You're actually allowed to get your phones out and be on it, right? So often we're saying, put your phones away. Well, give them some extra time to be on their phones. I know food is a great incentive because you think about if you feed them, they will come, right? But I know with our IDEA dollars, food's not permissible to be used, so we have to think about class rewards that aren't food. So I have this website at the end of the presentation, but I highly recommend looking at these incentives and then surveying your students to see, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. So we had one school who just did a sampling of these. They didn't go through every single thing, but they just did a sampling of things and surveyed their students to see what would be interest of them. And then also they left an open space where, what else do you suggest? We don't have it here. And of course, you know, some people say, or, you know, an Xbox or the game or sneakers or whatever it is. But at the same time, someone said, could we paint the ceiling tiles in different colors and things like that? They wanted to paint, right? That's just the art teacher. They could do that. One is a parking space, depending upon the school. One said tickets to the prom, so maybe having a drawing for that. Maybe tickets to a game. So there's lots of things there that, again, may not cost a lot of money. You could go to local businesses, but check out PBIS incentives, but then survey your students to find out what may be of interest to them as well. Because Rob Horner talks about PBIS at the secondary level is really only going to work if you have student engagement. So definitely recommend that. Let's go to C for course performance. So do students see themselves reflected in the content? Are they getting access maybe to high-level content? So just because our students have an IEP doesn't mean they can't have access maybe to the AP or International Baccalaureate classes, depending upon what their needs are. So that's course performance. We had a rural high school that we were working with, and we were taking a look at culturally responsive practices. And one of the things they did was they looked to see a lot of their male students were dropping out of school. You know what? They weren't too crazy about English and writing. And so they took the Keystone exam, typically in 10th grade. You know, there's Shakespeare, there's poetry, there's other things on there. And I was an English teacher, so of course I love that stuff. I eat it up, and I know everybody else doesn't. So anyway, they were looking at their data, and they're saying, you know what, we've got a lot of male students dropping out. We're seeing a lot of it's in the English classes, and so that's the class they're failing. So they decided that they created a course on hunting and fishing for their junior, senior year. And guess what? They're still classifying, analyzing, synthesizing, comparing and contrasting. They're still using the state standards, right? So sometimes we just need to think, again, out of the box. Let's go to the Jetsons versus the Fisher-Price phone. What are some things how we can get students engaged? Maybe it's technology we're bringing in. Maybe it's a gaming, coding, different things we could do, but they're still reading, they're still writing, they're still analyzing, they're still using those skills. So when we're looking at a multi-tiered system of support, what are we doing for all students, again, but then what are some things that, whether it's our curriculum or instruction that needs to change, and then what can we do for a few students at Tier 2 and then Tier 3. And really, I would say at the secondary level, we're looking at Tiers 1 and 2 kind of blending together. And then it's who really needs help, because that's the way our schedules work a lot of times at the secondary level. So it's what are we doing for all students, and then what are the issues maybe for one-on-one to help students. So it's almost like it's Tiers 1 and 2 blended together, and then Tier 3. And that, you'll see that in the Pennsylvania model as well for MTSS. One of the things when, again, talking to schools, when you ask students, how many credits do you need to graduate? And they're like, I don't know. And then you ask a family member, how many students does your child or student need to graduate? They don't know either. How many math courses do you need? How many English courses do you need? So a few years ago, I was attending a conference in a school. They created magnets of just credits, the number of credits students needed, as well as the number of subjects. So do you need four subjects or 4 credits for English? Do you need 4 subjects or areas for math? It depends on the school what's been determined. So put that on your website. Put posters up. Send magnets out so everybody knows how many credits do we need and in what subject areas, because that is amazing. Because a few years ago I was working with a site and they told me a student dropped out. They found out later they needed 1 credit to graduate. Nobody knew that. No one even told us, you know what, you just need 1 more credit and then you can graduate. But they didn't realize that. He just dropped out and he was gone. Oh my goodness, if we would have known he just needed 1 more credit, maybe he would have stayed getting credit recovery or whatever it is that he or she would need. So that's where I want to go with the credit recovery. So if you have students who maybe they failed a course, they may need to catch up, or we have one school where they offer credit recovery during the school day. So instead of going to 4th period history, they go to a classroom and they do the credit recovery course on the computer, but there's a teacher there. The teacher is monitoring their progress. We're not just putting a kid in front of the computer and saying, here, do this. We're making sure that they're being successful. I had one school I was working with, and they said, well, you know what, the student's probably just going to fail because they know then they can come back later on and take credit recovery. And I said, well, why don't we put them in credit recovery now? Why are we waiting for them to fail, then give them credit recovery? If we know they're going to be successful with credit recovery, give it to them now. Why do they have to go to the classroom, right? So there's just lots of things we can do, particularly now with technology, with online courses. We maybe have them take it after school or summer school programming, right? So think about what are other options we can do that maybe doesn't fit into that 7:30 to 2:30 schedule or whatever it may be. We also took a look at some internship opportunities. So again, going back to one of our schools that was a more rural community, it was hard for them to get students out into the community for transportation, or there weren't just a lot of businesses close by. So they created a school cafe in their library. And here's what they did with their funding. They call it the Dog Pound Coffee. They created their own coffee, and they used some of their funding. Here you can see they took this corner of the library. They created this bar here, and then here's their board. Their students, a lot of these students are students who are in life skills. They use this as part of their math, their reading, their writing. They come up with the prices, the advertising. They created their own blend. Every Wednesday morning, the cafe is open. It's open to the whole school. And they have these tables and chairs. And so it's this great community here. As I mentioned, food is something that certain funds can't be used for. So they petitioned a local business to say, hey, would you be willing to pay for this coffee? And so they've donated some of the coffee proceeds. And then as they've made money on this, they're able then to buy the coffee. So some coffee is donated. They've also now have hot chocolate blends. They've expanded their company and their business. But again, it's something where we couldn't get to a business or internship, but we're doing it right here in the school. They created that. Yes?
I have a question from your last slide.
Yeah.
So I know you said like a lot of it's centered around like these outcomes for students with special needs or things like that, and that benefits all.
Yeah.
And so when you get to things like credit recovery or online options, which are much shortened, condensed, less supported,
Yeah.
that's where we run into an issue because a lot of that doesn't meet the needs of special ed kids. So
Right.
when there's the attendance and the special ed, like I would be curious if down the road or if you have options, because credit recovery is extremely challenging for kids with special needs.
Yeah.
Because online or just the credit recovery class doesn't meet their instructional level or doesn't
Yeah.
meet their needs, so that can be a really challenging issue to like match up.
So just to repeat for the camera, so particularly with our students with disabilities, sometimes the online course offerings or credit recovery course offerings may be more challenging for students just because, again, the reading content, the reading level, also just that motivation to work independently, they may need a lot more structure and support. So again, one of our one site did was they had to then go to a classroom and the teacher was there and monitoring how they're doing on credit recovery. Then if they weren't doing well, they would review that content with them. So it wasn't just them going and doing it at home or after school or independently. They worked on it there, but then they were being monitored very closely, and then they would do different activities with them or supporting them if they didn't do well on the content. So that's how they kind of bridge that gap, if you will. They scaffolded some of the instruction to say, okay, I want you to try this chunk today. So they chunked out the credit recovery content. Because you're right, it was too much for them to handle independently. So that's one of the ways. Yeah, Luce.
I know one of the ways that we're working with one of our high schools currently, and one of the things that came up was credit recovery for students with disabilities. So we're actually partnering to find ways for the students to come to UNE after school to be able to do their credit recovery at UNE.
Yeah.
And that way we can provide them with, accommodations, mentoring, and assistance as they're working through them credit recovery. So that's another way of looking at your communities and finding, other creative ways of being able to make that work.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting option. I work with students who have emotional disturbances, and so our credit recovery courses that our district and our county offer take about 2 weeks to complete. They're really short.
Yeah.
So then that can be, I feel like then that it would be paired with a really great credit recovery course, because a lot of times what you said, students are failing to take it. I don't necessarily know it's the strategy, but it's a reinforcement of I can just take this 2-week class to pick up my 5 classes I attend or go to. So we do find all those red boxes you were talking about were still there.
Yes.
Because they weren't actually showing improvement.
So again, just to summarize what you're saying, I think looking at maybe this credit recovery is 2 weeks. Well, a student with disabilities is probably not going to happen in 2 weeks, but can we make it into a monthly program or however long it takes to do it? But it's scaffolded appropriately to meet their needs, but it's reinforced or presented in a different way. Yeah. And searching out for maybe after school programming or having a teacher there where they can go during that period, and instead of going to the class with 20 or 30 other kids, they're going and getting the support there that they need during that time. Thank you. That's a great observation, and I think a lot of schools. But yeah, the other thing I want you to think about too, sometimes we see summer school or summer programming as punitive, right? I failed a class, so I have to go to summer school. So one of the things some of our sites did is we had students who were failing physical education. And I thought, oh my gosh, these students aren't going to graduate because of phys ed? Are you kidding me? I was about ready to lose my mind. So they interviewed the students or asked them, so what's going on? Why aren't you going to phys ed? And they said, well, you get hot and sweaty, you don't want to change, and you go back to class. I understand that, right? So they said, okay, we're going to offer physical education classes on Saturdays. So they offered Saturday morning phys ed classes, and that's how students could do it. I know another school, they offered it in the summer, right? Come take your phys ed class over the summer. And again, it's not you failed, it's we're being proactive. So instead of, again, waiting for them to fail, if that's what we know, what can we do to make sure that they're going to be successful? So I'm really glad you asked that question. So I just want to share with you, where can you find these resources? Again, these slides are on the link that you have. If you go to our patent website, this has the step-by-step instructions on where you can find our publications. So it's patent.net. It's under the title Graduation and Post-Secondary Outcomes, Increasing Graduation Rates, and there you will see the publications. So we have an ABC publication for students. We actually did focus groups of students to come up with these. This isn't something that consultants did. It's in English and in Spanish. We also surveyed families, and we have an ABC publication for families. So when you have an IEP meeting, when you have a student who's coming in for maybe it's truancy, or you can have posters up, you have parent-family conferences at a basketball game, at a football game, at a play. Put these publications out so everybody can see them and have access to them. So you can order them in as many as you want. Remember that data team meeting protocol, the metrics, the action plan, all of that are under, again, patent resources, under data tools, and there you will find all those resources there for you as well. There's the booklet that we have. There's a video, Are Your Students on Track? And then we also have these really quick, they're kind of, I guess they're just called quick tip videos. They're less than 5 minutes. I'm an avatar in one of them. I have long flowing hair and I'm skinny, so I love it. And then you have Luz talking to the audience in Spanish. We also have a podcast. Barb Mozina, who's our BSE advisor, and I were asked to present through a podcast through IDA Data Center on what we're doing. So these are about 20 minutes long each, so check those out. You can listen to them in the car. And then you also have all of our resources. So here's all of our online resources for patent. Here are the national resources. Check out that attendanceworks.org. You will be amazed at what you can find on there. There's also the National Dropout Prevention Centers on here. We also have Check and Connect. And then we also have just that PBI incentives free book. So all those resources and access are there for you. All right, so I think we have a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? All right, as we're wrapping up, then I just want to share this video with you, and we will end our session after watching this video. All right, let me see here. Let me pull it up.
Describe myself as nice, sarcastic, and bubbly.
3 words to describe me would be crazy, outgoing, stick.
Okay, 3 words to best describe me. Ooh, loyal, driven, okay, and hardworking.
I'll say I'm kind and caring.
Funny, not too talkative in class, but like to have fun at the same time.
Huh? 3 words to describe me are fun, hard worker, and artistic.
That sometimes I'm a little moody, but I'll still get the work done, like on my own time. Sometimes I'm just like, I need my own time, and like I'll still get the work done. I'll just like, sometimes you're just in that phase where you're like, stay away from me. But yeah.
Freshman year, I was a pretty bad kid. I got suspended twice. One was for a fight, and one was for a food fight. And then I almost got suspended at the end. Actually, no, I did get suspended at the end of the year. Last week of school, I wasn't here. I got suspended for that, so I had to come back and retake my finals. I think what like drove me to be like is to like not be that kid that I was in freshman, sophomore, and then I kind of started switching over in the junior year where like, all right, I gotta stop being like this bad kid and then like actually do my work and start caring about stuff, because if the Marine Corps sees how I'm doing in here, they're not gonna take me into there, and it's not gonna be good.
I had more behavior problems, and it just took me a few times getting in trouble to not get in trouble anymore. And then I started realizing, and then I started looking at other kids and they would get in trouble and it would irritate me. So like, so yeah, now I kind of, that's just sort of how I grew out of it, I guess.
A difficulty that I probably had throughout high school would be freshman year. Just because you're like dropped off in this like big school, and like as a freshman you're kind of like lost.
I wasn't studying, so my teachers told me about studying is a good habit, so I got into it. So that really helped me. And I've been doing good ever since then.
Friends and family had convinced me to keep going, and teachers.
I used to struggle at reading, writing, like sloppy writing, but I got better.
Yeah.
I can read a lot better.
You're obviously here.
I gotta get my diploma.
I always wanted to go in the Marine Corps because I always like how their beliefs and values are. So I'm like, okay, I'll go in the Marine Corps, go into infantry, and then go off from there.
After high school, I plan on going to community college first, because like I said before, I wasn't the greatest student, so my grades aren't that good. But then after I go to community, I plan on getting transferred to a university so I can study in psychology.
Get a full-time job.
I want to become a police officer.
I feel like school is great. It's a good place to be. Because, I mean, it's just an experience that you wouldn't want to miss out on.
All right, thank you all so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.